someone on furlough, you must get their agreement to go on furlough. And again, there's been lots of things in the government's guidance about whether this needs to be on, it needs to be written or not written. You have to get their agreement to it. Now that can be via an email to say that they agree, but you really do need to make sure you've got their agreement, because HMRC have said you need to keep that agreement for 5 years. So to me, what that's saying is it'll be 5 years while they're doing their investigations into people who were allegedly furloughed or not, and whether there was any agreement. The danger is that if you don't have the agreement, once everybody starts coming back to work, there could be some claims for unlawful deductions. So I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure you've got agreement from your employees. If you've got a furlough letter, that's even better. If anybody needs a furlough letter, if you haven't got one yet, I'm quite happy to give you one of mine, but you do make sure you've got that. You need to protect yourselves. Now, what the government say about furlough is that you have to be on furlough for 3 weeks before you can actually claim the money back. So claiming the money back, I know for settings has actually changed now slightly in the guidance. So if you're claiming public funding, so you're getting your money from the local authorities, then you can't claim the full 80%. You're going to have to do your calculations. Again, my screen's going a bit funny now as well. You're going to have to do your calculations as to whether you can claim 60% or whether you can claim 40%. So there's lots of different calculations for settings, which has actually now made things very, very confusing for people. I'm just going to put myself on the screen. Okay. So with the furlough, the 3 weeks is a minimum, whether that's claiming 80%, 60% or 45%. But they have to be on that for 3 weeks to be able to get any of the money back from the government. Now that is just a minimum. They can be on it 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. That doesn't matter. It's not 3 week blocks, which is a lot of people are getting confused. It isn't 3 week blocks. It's just a minimum of 3 weeks. So if someone went off on, when the government announced it on the 20th of March and backdated it to the 1st of March, somebody could be off the whole of March, April, May and June, and they can claim the furlough. That's not a problem. They be off for a minimum of 3 weeks. So what some of the settings are doing that we work with is they're actually rotating some of their staff. So they're off for 3 weeks and then they're coming back for a week and then they're rotating and then they're off again for 3 weeks. The minimum that you have to have a break in between the furloughs is only 1 day. So also what some people are doing is bringing back a member of staff to do payroll perhaps. So they're furloughing them for 3 weeks, bringing someone back to do the payroll and then furloughing them again for another 3 weeks. But it has to be a minimum of 3 weeks to claim the money back for the government. If you bring them back prior to the 3 weeks, you will still only have to pay the percentage that you agreed. So whether that's 80, 60 or the 45%, but you will have to pay that yourself because the employees actually agreed to take that deduction, a reduction in their salary. So you can still pay that lower amount, but you will have to make that payment. So I think that's the 3 week thing is something a lot of people I'm seeing are getting very, very confused with, but you can rotate people. And that's what a lot of settings are actually doing to try to make that fair for staff. I said I was going to talk about shielding. If you've got people who are shielding, and there has been some new guidance just come out from the government only on Thursday and Friday last week, where they now got some different criteria for shielding. So people who haven't got spleens, for example, who were originally not on the protected list, now have been put onto the shielding list. So you might find that some people are going to come to you with shielding letters even now, when we would have thought that they would have all received them by now. There is, in the guidance, it says that you can furlough people who are shielding. There is some contradictory guidance to say that they should be on SSP because they aren't capable of working. But I would say if you've got somebody who's shielding, put them onto furlough. Because if you put them onto SSP, you will have to pay that SSP. You can only reclaim that for 2 weeks. And the guidance is saying that you can put people on who are shielding onto furlough. So that is, I think that would be what I would recommend for you to do. One of the other things that we're seeing a lot of is the questions around training, Yes, employees can do training while they're on furlough, but please make sure that you're calculating it correctly so they're not under the minimum wage. Now, in the settings, we know there's quite a few people are on the minimum wage, and if they are getting a lower rate of their pay while they're not working, that's fine. They don't have to have minimum wage while they're not working. But if you're asking them to do any training at all, you need to make sure that when they are doing any training, that they're not going to go below the minimum wage. So if you've got apprentices, for instance, if they're doing a lot of training, you need to make sure that they're not going underneath the minimum wage. If they're not doing any work, it doesn't matter that they're on less than the minimum wage. So that's another question we get asked quite a lot. One of the things that we are also seeing a lot of is that some people are now wanting to bring people back into work. So like if they're rotating, and this is becoming a bit of an issue because people are now saying they don't want to come back. So I think you need to prepare yourselves for that, that some people are saying they don't want to return and they actually think they have a right to stay off. Now, unless they've got a shielding letter, then they do not have a right to stay off and be furloughed. So you'll then have to look at whether you're going to make them go on unpaid leave, whether you want to take the next step, which is say they're on unauthorised absence, and take those steps. It will depend on the individual. You'll need to find out what's the reasons behind why they don't want to return to work. I mean, quite funny, some people are actually saying, well, I quite like just being at home, I'm 80%, I'm quite happy to do that. That's not a good enough reason to be still staying off on furlough. So we've been quite surprised at how some people are just not wanting to come back to work. But there we go. So I think that's probably the main things that I've seen about furlough. So I'm sure you've probably got lots of questions, and I'm happy to take those questions from people. So if you want to ask me any questions, I'm quite happy to answer those. We got any questions?
We don't have any immediately. We have one which is very generic. I'll hold on to that for a second. If anybody's got any questions about furlough, this would be a good time. Can't believe with 150 people on, nobody has any.
Jackie, we just had one in.
Yeah.
From Philippa asking, after making a claim, will HMRC contact you to verify?
They don't. They will just put the money into your bank. That seems to be what's happening. You'll receive a reference number. So once you put the claim into the portal, you'll get a reference number. But as far as I'm aware, you don't get anything else. And then the money appears in your bank. And the money's appearing. I've seen lots of people who've received their money already. They put their claims in on the 20th. And they've already had the money into their banks.
Yes, we've seen that as well, Jackie. I was on a call with a different group earlier on this morning, and probably about 40% had received the money this morning. So I think that's actually quite surprising that they've got it right, but also very, very good news for all of us that we're not going to be left to payroll issues over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's really good.
Right, lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to ask my colleagues to help me sift some of these. Adele, perhaps if you could ask one as well, and I'll go to the next one.
Okay, we had one from Jumbo7. Can we furlough staff ourselves and pay ourselves and not under this CJRS scheme?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you just still need to get their agreement, and you can say which percentage it's going to be. But if you're going to pay that yourself, so yes, it's like taking a reduction, so you don't have to use the government scheme. I don't know why you do that, to be honest. If the government's prepared to do it, because we don't know how long this is going to go on for, but you can do it if you want to.
Okay, good. So the next one, Jackie, is talking about maternity leave, and the question is, how does it affect maternity leave? I suppose the next part of the question is, what rate would you pay people on maternity leave? Would you pay them at the 80% or the 100%?
No, if somebody's on any of the family-friendly leave, so maternity, paternity, adoption leave, that's all they're entitled to. They can't claim both payments. So if you're on maternity leave, you get maternity pay. Paternity leave is the same. So unless you've got someone who, so sorry, Alan, did you say maternity or paternity?
Maternity.
Maternity. So yeah, they just get normal SMP. They can't have both payments.
Okay, lovely, thank you. The next question asks, if someone's topped up their staff to 100% in April, do they have to pay 100% in May, or can they only pay 80% in May?
Well, that would depend what you've agreed in the letter in writing, whether you're going to top it up or not. If you've actually put into the letter that you're going to do that, then you would struggle not to do it. But if you haven't agreed it in the letter, if you've left it open to say that you will review it each month, then you'll be able to vary that.
Okay, great, that's really helpful, thank you. Next one, if you live with someone who's shielding, do you have to return to work, or can you stay furloughed?
If you live with someone that is shielding, the guidance says that you can be shielded, but it's up to the employer to make that decision. So they can be furloughed if they live with someone that's shielding, but it is up to the employer to make that decision. So it's not a right. So you can't say I have to, be off and I have to be furloughed because I'm living with someone who's shielding. It's a decision the employer can make.
Great, thank you. Okay, here comes the first of the controversial ones,
right.
All about funding and furloughing 2S. So the question asks, are there any useful calculators to work out what percentage of staff can be furloughed, re-education funding and staff bill?
I don't think there is, because I think it's a complicated, I mean, in the guidance it gives you, I did bring this up because I thought this might come. If you work out what your funding is that you're going to get from the authority, what percentage that is of your wage bill, and then what the wage bill is left from your parents that pay, what's the difference you've got there? And that's the part that your parents pay is the bit that you're going to be able to claim for. But I know it's not as easy as that, and we've spoke to lots of nursery owners who are trying all sorts of different calculations. So there isn't an easy one, because each one will be different. And I also think the other thing that seems to be an issue, what I can see, is you're being asked to look back at what your February payments were and claim that money. However, I know that now lots of the parents aren't paying their full amount. So in February, they would have been paying their full amount, but you're not actually going to be receiving that money for the months now for March, April, and May and June. So you aren't going to still be getting all that money coming in. I think, so the answer, Alan, no, is there isn't anywhere that I know that's got an easy calculator, because I think every setting will be different, because they'll have different funding. As we all know, there isn't one size fits all. Local authorities give out different amounts. So I think it is definitely a very difficult calculation that you have to sit and make with a bit of paper and a calculator. I don't know anywhere that there is an easy option.
Okay, so one of the things you've highlighted there is something I hadn't really thought through sufficiently, and obviously if the private element is decreasing, therefore the public element as a percentage is increasing, that's going to make it incredibly difficult, to pay bills and meet bills, but equally to calculate where you should go on this process, because effectively it will be different every single month. Have I got that right?
Yeah, it will be different each month, and it's like, so when you make your first claim, you're supposed to calculate the payment of what was paid in February. But then when you make your next claim, you calculate the payment again for March. And then, so you're going back each month. So I think some people are confused where they think they've got to pay exactly what was paid each February. It's not, it's every month that you're claiming for. So you go back to that month. So if you made a claim for March, you'd be basing it on what you got paid in February. Make a claim for April, what you got paid in March, if that makes sense. So you are going to be getting less and less money coming in. So I'm hoping that you'd be able to then up your percentage that you would be able to claim back from the government, because you aren't going to be getting so much money coming in from the parents. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. As I said, I hadn't realised it changed every single month. So I think that's a really, really useful tip so far from today. I'm going to ask a few more questions if I can, Jackie.
Yeah.
So next one says, if your ratio of private fees is 87%, does it mean the maximum you can claim is 80% of furlough? So
what was the first part of the question, Alan?
If your ratio of private fees is 87%, does it mean the maximum you can claim is 80% of furlough?
Yes, it probably will be. If the maximum is 80%, anybody can claim. So you aren't going to be able to claim any more than 80%.
Okay. Next question. Can furlough be paid from other funds other than CJRT?
Other funds such
Yeah,
as?
quite sure what that means, because I don't know why you wouldn't want to get it paid from CJRT.
No. I mean, I really can't understand why some people, employers, would want to pay the money themselves when this is available from the government.
Jack, this question's from Debbie Chant. I don't know if she wants to elaborate. Are you there, Debbie?
You have to take yourself off mute, Debbie, if you want to clarify it. Can't see her. There's too many people. All right, well, let's come back to that.
Hello.
Debbie, you got it?
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, yeah. No, my concern is just sort of looking at this now where we're going to use the next month following, rather than just using February. We're obviously not now sort of getting any fees in at all, whereas February we did have quite a high fee pay-in month, which means our funding is going to be 100% then, which means we'll be able to claim less, won't it?
No, you should be able to claim more because you're not going to be getting the higher part from the parents' income.
Yeah, but we'd have a lower percentage then coming in from our fee paying, so our private income.
The private income is going to be lower. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
So it's a very complicated, and I see what you're saying there. It is going to be lower, but I just think you might be able to. I'm not sure actually. It's a very good question, that one, Debbie. I'll have to go and think about that one, because if it's going to be lower, how are you going to get more money?
Yeah, we're not going to show that there's anything coming from fee, so private income will be nothing.
Yeah.
And which means everything will be funding then, so we'll have literally no percent to put in a furlough claim for.
Yeah, it's a good question. I might try and see if I can find out a bit more about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. It's a great question, and I think you're right there with the point you're highlighting. If the funding increases as a percentage, then it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to claim. So let Jackie come back to us, and we'll go from there. Jackie, next question is about minimum wage.
Yeah.
I've been told I'm not entitled to get the increase as on furlough, but if I can prove training, should this be at the new minimum rate, minimum wage rate? Sorry, didn't get the teeth in there.
Yes, it should be. If it's for the payment for March, for payment for April. So once the new minimum wage came in, you need to be paying people that minimum wage rate from April. So you wouldn't have qualified for it for March or payment, but April payments, yes. It has to be at the new minimum wage.
Okay, next question from Tracy. Can you explain 3 and 4 year 15 hours funding claim, please?
Sorry, say that again?
Can you explain 3 and 4 year 15-hour funding claim, please? I presume that means 3 and 4 year olds 15 hours funding claim.
I can't, because I don't, that's not really my area, is the funding fees.
Okay.
So sorry, can't help on that one.
Don't worry. With regards to training, my staff are all completely off and not doing any work. They have access to online training. Are they able to volunteer and do this without me instructing them? Does this affect their pay, as I haven't requested them to do this? Thank you.
Yeah, what I would advising people, if staff are off and they're doing training, I would say that you need to make sure that they are doing the training that you want them to do, and also stipulating the hours that you want them to do it. Because as I said before, if they are working, they have to get minimum wage. If they're not working, you don't have to be paying them minimum wage. But if someone then decides, well, I'm going to sit and do 35 hours of training, and actually then that takes my percentage that I'm receiving from you as my wages below the minimum wage, then you'll face a claim for unlawful deductions. So I'm saying to our nursery owners, make sure you stipulate how many hours you want them to actually do training for, so that you don't go below the minimum wage.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Next question, Jackie's from David, and he asks, does the 3 weeks have to be in one single block, or can it be split up?
No, single block.
Okay, good. Good. I think that's all I've got come in at the moment. I'm looking at multiple different places, so if one of my glamorous assistants could help me. Okay. Okay, here's the next one. How will government calculate next month's funding? Because this month was February's numbers.
I have no idea.
Love the honesty. Okay. Let's move on then. You say about training and receiving minimum wage, but government portal was calculated on average income of tax year 2019-2020. Furlough pay is less than minimum wage for April 2020. Not quite sure what that's asking.
No.
Whoever that was, if you'd like to just help us with that one.
Hi everyone, yeah, that was a question from myself. We're part of a bigger organisation, so they put the furlough through on the government portal. And when they put it through on the government portal, they had to take the average earnings across the tax year 2019 to 2020. We topped up any furlough pay to 100% pay, but because on furlough they pay national insurance and taxes as well, they had to put the amount into the portal, and therefore the amount that we topped them up on, my accountant saying that it can't be done on the April minimum wage, which was what I was expecting, but they couldn't do that. Does that make sense?
Because that was for the March payment, though.
Yeah, that was March.
Yeah. So the
Okay.
The new minimum wage doesn't come in until April 6th. So it will be April payments. You should be paying the.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's my misunderstanding. Thank you.
Okay, good. Here's the next one. Please, can you confirm the calculation to be used to work out the pay bill? I.e., if the private portion of income is 70% versus funded 30%, is it 70% of the 80% or 70% of 100%, which is the furlough pay? I'm sure you've had that question asked multiple times, but slightly more clearly than I've read it out.
I think it will be the 70% because the government won't pay more than 80%. So the government is only going to pay a maximum of 80%.
Yeah, I think they're asking, Jackie, is it 70% of the 80% or 70% of the 100%? Should it be the full pay or the furloughed element of pay?
I think it'll be the furloughed element of the pay.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Next question from Naomi. Do you think the government will relook at the amount of furlough for staff? I presume that means the rates, Naomi, I presume so?
I think they might look at the nursery sector again. I mean, I think the thing is with the guidance, they keep changing it. You know, it's changes on a daily basis. So keep looking out to see what the changes are. And I know that quite a lot of people in the nursery sector have been trying to lobby the government to get these changed. So what happens one month may not happen for the next month. And in fairness to them, it's all new to them as well. You know, this furlough scheme that was put together would normally take something like 2 years for the government to do something like this. And they've done it in such a short space of time that there are going to be areas that they do have to go and revisit and look at again. So let's see what happens. Is what I would suggest is that you wait till the closest you can to the end of the month to put your claims in to make sure that you're still going to get the money for payroll, just in case they do make any more changes.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point about the fact that the government are learning as well. And as I opened up with on this section, I think we were all relieved when we started to see the money come in today. I think that's very, very positive. I think the frustration though within the sector is the sector felt they were told one thing, and then the guidance said something slightly different. And that's one of the reasons our friend Vicky Ford has had an interesting time on all the blogs and everything over the last couple of weeks. So I think you're right, Becky. I think you're really right, Jackie, that it's all changing, and people just got to keep an open mind and keep their eyes open for what happens next.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Next question. I'm pregnant working in a private nursery, but I'm a nursery assistant and I'm doing my NVQ3. Do I have to pay because my exams had to be cancelled?
I'm not sure why you would be paying for the NVQ anyway.
Yeah, so it's an apprenticeship, so hopefully you're doing it for
Yeah,
an
your
apprenticeship.
employer should be paying. If it's training that you're doing because of your job, then your employer should be paying for that and also paying you for the time that you're doing the training. Working time regulations, you have to be paid while you're training.
Okay. So the next question is going back to something we've already talked through. It says our funding was 40% and parent fees 60% in February, so we claimed 40%. In March, we will only have funding money coming in. So what is the percentage furlough do we claim? So it was 40% public and 60% private. And they're saying now what happens now when it all changes? And
I think this is, we did talk about this earlier, we just need to keep an eye on what's going to happen, because as the funding is going down, as your money from coming in from the private side is going down, I think the government are going to have to revisit that.
Okay, good. Thank you. We had from Lindsay, we had 3 staff that were unable to be furloughed due to their start dates, 2nd of March and 16th of March. Can we claim for them through the furlough scheme next month?
No, they had to have been, the only people that can claim for furlough must have been on the RTI submission by the 19th of March. So when the government changed the date, it didn't really help many people that get paid monthly, because your payroll submission doesn't go in normally till the end of the month anyway. So the only people that gained from that was anybody that was paid weekly who went onto the RTI. So unless you're on the RTI submission that went to HMRC, then no, those people still cannot claim. And I can understand the reason why the government have made a cut-off date. That's because that, you know, you would get some companies who would have been adding lots of people onto their payroll system in March to then claim a furlough payment for them, that family and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So last question then, Jackie, if we could. Can you be furloughed if you can't work due to childcare issues?
Yes, as long as your employer is happy to do it, yes. Okay, and that's an issue that we're going to have when you know, we don't know what Boris is going to say today about whether people are going to start to go open shops and things. But if the schools are still closed, then people will say, well, I can't work, so I still need to be furloughed. But yes, you can be furloughed if you've got childcare issues. Okay, good. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for your time this morning, and thank you for answering all of those questions. I'm aware that there are still a number we haven't answered. What we will do, everybody, is we'll engage with Jackie outside of this webinar, and we'll get answers to all of those questions and then post out to all of you. We've obviously got your email addresses because you've registered, so we'll post those all out very shortly. Thank you again, Jackie. I'd say we should all clap, but you'll have to do it like this, and then everybody can see you, but they can't hear you. But thank you, Jackie. It's really very welcome. Sorry I couldn't answer all the ones about funding, but we'll watch this space.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Jackie Mulgrave, who's going to give us talk to us about COVID-19 and infection prevention with children. So Jackie, or next Jackie as it were, so welcome to you. Jackie is a trained general nurse and did post-registration training to become a sick children's nurse at Birmingham Children's Hospital. There's loads more stuff here for me to read, but I'm sure you'd much prefer to actually listen to Jackie rather than me. One thing I did forget to say at the beginning, though, is we will have a comfort break after every other speaker. So Jackie's going to talk with us for about half an hour, and obviously that will include questions, and then we'll have a comfort break. So Jackie, all over to you.
Morning, everybody, and thank you for asking me, and thank you for joining. Yes, I originally trained as a sick children's nurse, and at that time I became very aware of just how important infection control is when working with very young children. And then about 20 odd years ago, I started teaching early childhood studies courses at our local FE college, and again taught the BTEC child health module, which really again opened my eyes to the importance of how we work with very young children to control infection. And now I'm working at the Open University, and this is my area of research interest. And I find it absolutely fascinating. One of the things I'm particularly fascinated about is that we've got this virus. I was really expecting that we were going to get a bacteria that was resistant to antibiotics. And we know quite a lot about the virus. Well, what we know is that it impacts on older people. It doesn't really seem to be affecting that many children at the moment. I will be absolutely fascinated to hear more about the transmission. I'm not the only one there, I know that. I think one of the biggest areas of anxiety, if you like, attention is going to be for staff returning to work, and of course parents when we reopen. And I feel that we're sort of at a point where we have to, moving forward, of course this virus is going to be with us forever, and until we get a vaccine we're going to have to be incredibly careful. But I'm really concerned about the balance between how we protect children's social and emotional well-being and staff well-being with managing infection. Looking at the NHS workers, of course they're working right with people who have definitely got the infection and are wearing full protective clothing. And I know lots of people are thinking that's probably something that we should all be doing. As recently, yesterday over the weekend rather, in the press, a lot of talk about wearing masks when we're out. And I would caution the use of masks as a general step to take in nurseries. As you know, communication difficulties can be a real problem when we are wearing masks. You can't see facial expressions, and this is particularly problematic for very young children. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be concerned about touching children, but again, we all know that very young children need appropriate physical contact as a basic need, and I think that we're going to have to think carefully about how we exercise social distancing in relation to young children. Denmark have reopened schools last week, so I know that a lot of interest will be expressed into how they're managing that. So of course schools, older children, but they are going to separate, they've reduced the number of children in a class. They've set out the tables 6 feet apart. Children have got to wash their hands every hour. They have got to bring everything that they need for their day in school with them to avoid sharing and cross-contamination. I have a lot of concerns about that approach. We all know that the number of children around the world are reported as having an increase in mental health issues. So if we are over-regulating even more their lives and what they do by putting in place social distancing, when many children who are very young won't really be able to understand, obviously, the rationale behind such choices. So I really am hoping that as a workforce that we can, as a profession of early childhood practitioners, we can develop a pragmatic but as safe as possible approach that really keeps the importance of all the things that we know are important when working with young children at the heart of what we do. Reducing their anxiety, being really good role models, and working with parents in upbeat, sensible ways. And I'm absolutely taking into account all of the anxieties everybody is experiencing as a result of this pandemic, quite rightly, but we have a real duty to be as positive as we possibly can for children. One of the things I think that this is a good opportunity for is to review prevention of infection policies. There's absolutely loads of really useful information, and I'm very happy to pull together some resources to pass on to you. As always, the single most important thing that we can do is to develop really good hand washing practices and teaching children to do the same in playful ways, and being patient with them as they learn how to build this in, because I don't honestly think that we're always as good as remembering to get children to do effective hand washing. We know how long it takes. One group of children that I'm also concerned about, of course, are those with complex medical needs. They are more susceptible to infection, and that will really need a lot of consideration. And of course, children who've got asthma that is particularly brittle or prone to attacks, they are going to need special consideration. And at the moment, I don't quite know what the measures are going to be, or the advice is going to be about such children returning to early childhood settings and to school. And I suppose that's the main point of, well, not the main point, you know, the main points that I would like to make, really. And I'm very happy for any questions to be passed on, or any clarification of anything that I've said already. So I'll hand back over to you, Alan.
Brilliant, thank you, Jackie. So the one that struck me, or the one sentence that you struck me more than anything else, was the concept of masks, and having masks in a children's setting. You know, there'll be children who are going to be terrified by that. I'm very much aware, though, that wearing masks in certain areas of the world has become mandatory. What are your thoughts on how the government and how our sector will respond to the need of masks? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think we have to weigh up the benefits of wearing masks and also the disadvantages. And one of the big disadvantages is how we actually use them. As you can imagine, they can become real reservoirs of infection. And if we are not removing them safely and storing them safely, they can become potentially even more dangerous. But I can see how a lot of people feel that this is the right thing to do, but I firmly believe it isn't the right thing for people working with very young children. I've been following the mask debate very closely, and I think what the government is saying is actually correct, that first of all, regulation of the quality of masks is a difficult challenge, because there are different sort of levels, if you like. And again, to use the word pragmatic, I think that yes, it will be really important when we're out and about to cover our faces when particularly in places that are populated densely, like transport and so on. But I would caution over-reliance on them as being a barrier. I don't think everybody is always as careful as or aware of gloves, for instance. You know, that it's a similar sort of problem, and in relation to wearing gloves, because we can think that they are giving more protection than they really are. And I think the point is that you made a really important one. Very young children are going to be really very scared, and I think we run the risk of making communication problems even more problematic. We know that many children, particularly those who live in deprived areas and in poverty. We know that there is that there are more communication and language difficulties, and early childhood practitioners have a huge role in closing that gap, and I don't think wearing masks will in any way add to that challenge.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is from Jessica, and she asks, she states that she can't begin to see how we even social distance with children in nurseries. She says they need physical contact with adults, at least the bottle feeding, etc., and they put everything in their mouths. And they would love each other and want to play. I really hope they don't insist we reopen yet. It really worries me. So Jackie, I'm sure that's a fear that most people will have at the moment. Any thoughts on that as a general?
I totally agree. I think it's almost as a workforce, we have to try and get the message out that what else can we do? We can't socially distance with very young children. And we have to be well informed of the reasons why and spread that message.
Okay. So Sharon asked, picking up on this point, that whether it would be wise to check the children's temperature on arrival, obviously, as well as washing hands and so on and so forth. And I know temperature checking has been very, very important in many countries. Doesn't seem to be as important in the UK. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's an excellent idea, and thank you. I hadn't actually, believe it or not, really thought that, but that is a really practical and useful part of the strategy to protect everybody.
That's really good. It's quite interesting. I actually live part in Singapore and part in the UK, and my little boy, who has been going to school until we had lockdown in Singapore, had temperature checks every single time he entered the building. He's 8, but even the nursery children, every single person has had temperature checks, well, since early January. So it's just a very different way of looking at things. Next one, staff will be worried about return without some protection. Can we test ourselves as key workers if we get symptoms, but should that be our only protection? And hand washing. Should we be taking children's temperatures on entry and monitoring regularly? So the same question about temperatures, but I think it's also about how do people protect themselves?
I think some of this will require really careful participation with parents and trying to build on those very positive relationships that are in place already. And I think human beings are really, on the whole, pretty good at taking on new behaviours. And, you know, we can see, I mean, 6-7 weeks ago in this country, if anybody said we'd be in the situation that we're in now, we really wouldn't have believed it. So I think that, I keep hearing the phrase, we're all in this together. Hopefully parents will have a really responsible approach to protection of themselves and preventing infection. So I think and maybe we all ought to be, once we do open up to business and children going to their early childhood setting, maybe everybody should be checking their temperature and thinking about symptoms so that then they can, you know, not go to the setting and minimise the prevention of infection. Go on.
Well, it's really funny you said that. Leslie's just put a really, really important point, and that is what happens if parents dose the children up with Calpol before the child arrives at nursery. And I think that's a really interesting question, because no doubt some of them will.
Yes, and they always have. And it's I think, I mean, we've always had infection, obviously, and I think we underestimate the impact that even a common cold has on very young children. As adults, we can dose ourselves up, we can say we feel rubbish, we can go on through, but of course young children, they don't have the language, they don't make the connections with their feelings as a consequence of infection. So it's something that's always been there, but hopefully this very big event that we are going through will, again, all I can say is change behaviours and give people more need to be as responsible as possible to try to break this cycle of infection.
Okay, thank you. So Jennifer Lewis is asking probably the key question of the day for you. And she says she's concerned that a parent or carer would come into the nursery with COVID-19 and pass it on to staff. She says, what protection would there be for childcare professionals?
What protection in what sense do you mean?
I think from getting COVID. I mean, I presume she's asking whether, you know, whether they go as far as PPE and that sort of thing. What's your view on that? Because, you know, other than washing hands frequently, there isn't a lot more open to professionals washing hands and masks at the moment. So do you have any thoughts on how our staff as a whole can protect themselves?
I think, like I say, a review of infection control procedures will be really important. About handover of children, reviewing, you know, do parents come into the setting? And it's quite tricky to give one overall answer, because each setting is going to be or have features of uniqueness. And I would definitely be very much against having full PPE for early childhood practitioners for all the reasons that we've discussed. And I suppose that means that there is an element of risk involved. But at this moment, until we know more about how the virus is being passed on and why it doesn't seem to be affecting children, thank goodness, as much, there really isn't a particularly good answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. David has suggested that the only real answer is just to not let parents into the nursery, which I can see the benefits of, but I can also see that being somewhat controversial. So this is going to be our last question, Jackie, and this one you're going to love. Naomi is asking, key workers can have a test, but that test is only current for the time you take it. Obviously, you could catch COVID the next day. So her question, I think, is very much about how long or how frequently should key workers test for COVID?
That is a good question. And I can only go back to back at the beginning of the 1980s when the HIV and AIDS epidemic started. And it was the same thing. We had to make this realization that your test is only as good as the the result on the day that you get, or on the day it's taken. And so some of it is going back to preventative measures. Going back to the beginning of the 80s, it was, I think we used to test quite infrequently. I think it was something like 3 monthly. But again, it's the same thing. It's not a definitive guarantee in any shape or form. So again, going back to preventative measures are really that needs to be the focus of containing the infection. So yeah, tricky questions, lots of unknowns, and a lot of it is applying a lot of common sense, but really good practice.
Okay, great. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for imparting your knowledge and wisdom with us. I'm really clear that like an awful lot of the questions that were asked of you are almost impossible to answer. And I think therein lies the problem for all of us. We're all making assumptions throughout, aren't we? We're all trying to second guess what's happening, but because there is no definitive answer, I think it makes it so much harder. But genuinely, we really appreciate your time. And once again, nobody can hear you, but you can hear me. So thank you very much, Jackie. We're going to have a 5-minute break, everybody. Time for a cup of tea and time to use the loo. And then we'll regroup in 5 minutes. So let's call that just after 25 to. And Tonya Mears is going to talk to us about communication and language skills for our children at this difficult time. So see you all in 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody. You don't need to log off, just leave it there, it'll be fine.
Hello, Jan, it's Julie. You all right, love?
Was our money coming?
I think some people need to turn their microphones off. And possibly turn their cameras off. There's some funny things going on.
Okay, everybody, we're going to regroup. I can see a few people missing, but in the main, everybody seems to be there. So we'll get going again. Before we do so, thank you to Jackie and Jackie for this morning's sessions. I have seen that a load more questions and points have come in for Jackie after we finished her presentation. So again, what we'll do is we'll get these collated, we'll get them answered, and then we will get them distributed to you. I hope that works okay. So we're going to move on now and ask Tonya to give us an update. Tonya is going to be talking to us today about communication and language skills, and particularly helping parents engage with storytelling. So Tonya, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, and over to you.
Yes, I've somehow managed to lose my, there you are, you're back. It's like technical hitch.
That's inevitable. But we can see you and hear you, so you're all good to go.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Just for those of you who don't know who I am, I run Little Creative Days with my sister, and we specialise in creative storytelling, which is very much about getting the children to make things such as puppets and interact with stories. Now, we also train early years practitioners in how to use creative storytelling, as well as working in schools and nurseries, doing writing and puppet making workshops. And I've also written a number of books about a little dog called Pojo, and we put those together with our creative literacy resources, which we've won a number of awards for early years. So we're really pleased with that. And if that wasn't all enough, I also run an online writing club for children aged 7+ called Scribbler Zone. So we're very much, as you can tell, all about stories. And when Gail came to me and said, could I do something? I thought it would be quite interesting or quite helpful for practitioners to perhaps do something with parents and how to use stories. Because I think stories are sometimes underestimated in their importance, but actually they are.
I'm just on a webinar now. I'm just going to put the sound on. Sorry? I'm just on a webinar and I'm just going to put the sound on.
Getting children to convey how they feel. Sometimes it's how they make sense of the world. So did you know that the more words a child knows by the age of 8 is actually their biggest predictor of their future success, regardless of their social or economic backgrounds. So stories are really, really quite powerful. They also help them to develop their cognitive skills and their emotional intelligence. So it helps children to make sense of the world, builds empathy and understanding. Now, what we also do when we go into schools is run workshops on storytelling for parents. And I have got a handout which is actually available for a download on our website. So if you just go to our website, it's up on the right hand corner, and in there you've got a lots of different types of storytelling games that you can do with children or pass on to the parents. And I'm quite happy for you to send the handout to parents as a way of keeping in touch with them. I'm sure at the moment that you probably still keep in contact with all the parents, and it might be that they're struggling to find different things to do. So we thought I'd go through a few storytelling games with you, just to lighten it up a little bit from the day-to-day news that we're all subjected to at the moment. So some of the games that so we get the parents to do is to either get an old jacket or a box and just fill it with some random things, and then start to make up a story about those random things in the jacket. So when we do it, we use a really old leather jacket, and it's got a lipstick, a train ticket, a toy dinosaur, some old children's spy glasses. What else have we got in there? Yeah, Stegosaurus. I think we've got it in there. So we've got all sorts of little silly random things, pack of playing cards, and then we just get the kids to start making up some stories. But what we do is we start off with who wears a jacket like this, and we build a picture about the person who might be wearing that jacket. And then we start to pull the things out of the pockets. And it's incredible the stories that start to come out from using a jacket and random things that you've got around the house. Some other things you could do is invent a new story from an old one. So perhaps the Three Little Pigs could be three little spacemen and make up a whole new story using the Three Little Pigs. Or you could change the setting, so Cinderella could live on a pig farm. Or you could change the time, so perhaps with Goldilocks and the Three Bears, set it in the future. Or wonder what the elves and the shoemaker are doing now. So you could get them to retell a fairy tale and make it up into a whole new story. And something else that we do is also a story relay. So it's great for certainly for a little family. One starts off the first sentence of the story. So one starts off with once upon a time, and then the next person goes on and says the next sentence to carry that story on, and so on, and you keep it going. Could be a good one to do when you're out and about, perhaps on a walk or in the supermarket. Just make up an item, just make up a story about someone in the supermarket and a food item, and see what random things you could come through for that. When you've lost something, that's usually quite a good story. So you can invent stories about something that's been lost. Kids in particular, if they've got a favourite toy, what happens if they lose their favourite toy? Does it go off on an adventure somewhere? And that's the premise of our Pojo stories. He gets itchy paws when his owner Sam goes to sleep at night, and off he goes on a little adventure. So we always ask the children, well, where does your toy go to when you're at nursery or when you're at school? And they always love to come up with some stories about that. And at the moment, obviously, if we can get out and about, you can always make up stories about anything that you see in and around the garden or out on your walk. So I wonder what that bee or that butterfly has been doing. Where has it been? Where's it going to? So we've got quite a good few little stories there. We've also do some little books about making up stories and reading aloud, which are quite useful and quite useful for parents to use. because parents sometimes feel that if you ask them to make up a story, they say, well, actually, I can't do that. But actually, we can all make up some stories in lots of different ways, and actually, it's quite a nice, light-hearted way to perhaps relieve some of the tension that we've got at the moment about what's going on in the world. But also, they're quite a good way for perhaps the children, if they are feeling scared or feeling frightened about the COVID-19, might be a way of getting them to talk and using it as a way to use it through a story. You might find quite useful. So I hope perhaps that's given you a few ideas. Quite happy to take some questions if anybody else has got any questions about how to use storytelling or how to use creative storytelling.
Great, thanks, Tonya. So we've got quite a few questions coming in already.
Okay.
The first one says, what age group are these activities aimed at?
Well, for our activities that we actually produce, they're for sort of ages 3 to 6 in nurseries, but actually stories you can use from any age, right from the very beginning. The more stories that you read to a child, the better, because obviously it's developing their vocabulary, and it's putting it, and a story will always help to put it into context. So I would say actually always read to a child right from birth, really.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned a statistic at the opening bit, which I'm afraid I didn't write down. I was too busy doing other things. But you said a child at 8 years old has a vocabulary, and you quoted something specific around it. Can you reiterate that one and put some meat on the bones for me?
Yeah, the more words that a child knows at the age of 8 is their biggest predictor of their future success. It doesn't matter what their background is or their economic background. So they could be quite poor, but actually if they've got a really good vocabulary, they will always be able to learn. It's how you can communicate, and if you can communicate properly, you can learn.
That's brilliant. I didn't know that. That's something
yeah,
really
it's always
yeah,
it's always one of those little facts that most people don't realise, but it's why certainly in early years, I think it's why using stories is so crucial to development, because it helps to build on that vocabulary.
Okay, brilliant. So the questions come in which asks, how does this help parents? I presume it means in the context of what's going on with COVID and everything, and explaining things to children. Can you put some meat on the bones on that one for me?
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of what we've got with the storytelling games, are in a way you can use them as some light relief rather than necessarily, because I think we all hear so much about obviously the virus and the doom and gloom stories, but actually you could work it into how would the story feel, use the virus in the story, so perhaps how their teddy bear might feel if they were feeling poorly, and why it's important to wash hands, and you can use that as part of a story. So for parents, but this is more to do with sort of perhaps having a bit of light relief and getting involved, the families getting together. We're all together quite a long time at the moment, so it's a way of having a bit of light relief, really, of playing a storytelling game.
Lovely, thank you. The next question says, can we dress up when using storytelling at the setting?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've gone in and been pirates, and we've gone in a lot of schools. We've gone into World Book Day week, for example. So yeah, absolutely, storytelling and dressing up, and actually make up some stories that get things out of a dressing up box. Brilliant.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, this is a really interesting question. So Wendy has asked, if she were to read a well-known story on Facebook to the children, would they be subject to breaching copyright? Any thoughts on that one?
Oh, no. I know I'm a lawyer by background, but not necessarily in copyright. My advice would be to stick to the fairy tales, because in that case, definitely they're out of copyright, so everybody can use a fairy tale. Generally, I think a lot of the books, I mean, we've got some free Pojo books on our that's available to download, so we're quite happy for parents to use those if you want to and read those. That's quite happy, that's, you know, more than happy to do that. If you're talking to a small enclosed group, the chances are no, you wouldn't, you would be okay. If it's for public broadcast, it might be a different issue, and you need to get the consent of the author and the publisher.
Yeah, I think my view on that would be to get on and do it and just apologise later. I think we're in difficult times, aren't we? And I think anything that brings joy to a child should be embraced. And if the lawyers want to play the games afterwards, then so be it. Right.
Yeah, to be honest, they probably wouldn't. A lot of the authors are all doing the stories on live Facebook anyway, so yeah, I wouldn't worry too much.
Okay. So Naomi is asking if she's furloughed, is she able to upload stories to her families, to her children's families?
I don't see any reason why not. I mean, that might be more a question for Jackie, really, but no, I can't see any reason why not. You're still, at the end of the day, you're still keeping contact with your families, which is why we've done the handout, and I'm happy for the handout for them to send the handout to parents as well, or use the games within a nursery. So yeah, I don't see any reason, why not.
I agree completely. Okay, Lindsay asks, what have you found the most effective way of telling a story online? Is it a Zoom session or a Facebook Live or anything? What have you found for storytelling online?
It's not usually, well, this is the first time we're starting to do storytelling online. So we've used Facebook Live to do that.
Okay, fabulous. Oh, somebody's just said in answer to the previous question, publishers have info on their websites about reading online. And that's Joe. Thanks, Joe, for that. I'm sure they do, but I'm quite sure they'll be quite stringent about what you can and cannot do. As I said, I think at a time where we're in a global crisis, I nearly said national crisis, but it's a global crisis.
It is.
I think people should just relax a bit.
Yeah, quite.
Okay, someone's asked to ask you a direct question, Tonya. It's Akrita. So, Akrita, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hello.
There you go, you're done. If you want to ask Tonya a direct question, please do.
Yeah, I just want to ask that for the storytelling, how will this help the parents and children, like to encourage, how will you encourage them to, by doing the storytelling when you're at the setting, or even if you're at home or doing,
Sorry, can you repeat that?
How will you encourage, how will this actually encourage the parents and children when they are doing the storytelling by using the puppet or dressing up? How will they encourage the child?
We find creative storytelling is it's about so if they're making puppets of characters in the story, actually what we do is when we do our creative storytelling sessions, when I can speak properly, is we tell the story to start with, and then we get them to make up puppets of the characters, and then they come back and they retell the story with their puppets, so they interact with their own puppets in the story, and because they've made their puppet, they actually love it. They want to get involved, they love getting involved, and actually that's where they really participate. And we've had children in settings that have actually been selective mute, and have come on, they've made a puppet, and actually they've interacted with that story really well, and it's brought them to life, because it's not, when children use a puppet, it's not about them, so they hide behind it a little bit, and it boosts their confidence. So puppets are a really, really good way of getting children to interact with stories.
Okay, good. Tonya, thank you so much. We've got about 5 minutes left, but I know you've got quite a few resources that you're willing to share with people. And obviously, we're very happy to pass all of those on to everybody, and we'll obviously pass on your web address and everything. But can you talk about a little bit more about the resources you've got? You said you have some books and some pamphlets or leaflets. Can you just tell everybody what's available?
Yeah, sure. We've our creative literacy resources are a complete pack of resources. So there's the book of one of the Pojo stories, and we've done about 7 of those now. So we've got a pirate story, Pojo and the Chest of Dreams. Pojo Saves the Rainforest is very popular. And within that pack, we've got the templates for making up all the puppets, along with obviously everything you can then download and make up the puppets so that you can interact with the story, and the instructions and everything else are there. We've also got, like I said, some books on our website that are useful, sort of how to make up stories with children. That's available. And also Enjoy Reading Aloud is another book that we've got. They're only about £4.99, I think, on the website. So we've got a number of resources for early years. We've got things like story spinners, and so they're quite useful for using for making up stories, as well as things like story starter cards. So we've got a number of different resources on our website that's available, so feel free to go and have a mooch around. And Storytime magazine is another subscription we do, as Creative Steps. I'm sure most of them have heard of Creative Steps. So yeah, there's quite a lot of resources there, and like I said, we're quite happy to download the handout, and it's something that we thought practitioners could also send out to parents to help, just something else to do at the moment when we're all locked in together.
Okay, lovely. Wow, that's been fascinating. I really enjoyed it and learned something about age of children at 8 and how many words and what that does to their life. That's just brilliant. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So just a reminder, everybody, that we'll send links out to Jackie and everybody else's website after the event, and any handouts, we'll forward them on to you all. So as long as we've got your email address, which we must have, otherwise you couldn't be here, we'll get it all sent out to you hopefully later today. Anyway, so we're going to move on to Rachel Macbeth Webb, who is going to talk about something which I think is incredibly important for today, and that's resilience. I think at a time when we are all faced with this never-ending doom and gloom in the press and on the telly, but equally at a time when we really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or when we'll be unlocked or whatever else is going on with COVID, it's a really, really important subject. So Rachel, I'm going to hand over straight to you, if I may, without any further ado. You just need to unmute yourself first. Bottom left-hand corner. And I will try and do it for you. I just got to find your name. Try that. You're unmuted now, Rachel.
Okay. Oops.
We just lost a picture of you there.
I don't know what's. Oh, there you go.
There we go. You're back. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for inviting me here today. I've got quite a lot to say and I've made quite a lot of notes. So if I don't look like I'm looking at the camera, it's because I want to make sure that I don't miss some of the things that I think are important to touch upon today. So we often hear the word resilience spoken about quite a lot, and I think it's really important, especially with what we're facing at the moment, to unpick that a little bit and think about how our settings really promote and foster this in the children and the staff that attend our settings. So we often hear talk about it. We need to understand what it is before we can be best placed to support those children and staff. So what is it? It's essentially bouncing back from something that we find difficult, something that's tricky, something that is a real challenge for us. And resilience is about how we actually cope with that. So, at the moment we can all relate to this. We're all testing our own resilience at the moment, and I'm sure we've all witnessed children grappling with something in our settings, or staff that can't quite grasp the concept you're trying to convince them to do. It's your ability to bounce back, and we need to really ensure that children have good modelling of this skill and have opportunity to develop it. How we approach it with our staff and with our children is really crucial. It can have huge benefits if we go about it in the right way. And what I mean by that is ensuring that we take account of the experiences of children, but also the staff that we have in our setting. We all come to our settings with different life experiences. I know my staff certainly do, and that can actually impact on and encourage them to think differently about the views they have around childhood. So what I think is really important and crucial is that teams come together so that they're able to share their feelings, share their views, and really develop a shared rationale and vision for practicing their setting. This is something that we've absolutely done, and it makes your intentions to stakeholders, parents, and the wider community completely clear and shows your commitment to children. This isn't a process that I think we can rush. And in my setting, this took us a long time. And it's something that you need to really sit down and unpick with your staff so that you can develop a shared rationale and vision that means your stakeholders, your parents, all those people we talked about before can see your why you do what you do. And this is important not just for resilience, but for all other aspects of practice that you hold dear about your setting. So how can we do this? I think there are 3 ways of unpicking this. And firstly, you need to gather the professional and personal values of your team. So sitting down together, working out which values are dear to you. And they'll be different for everybody. But there are many, many tools online that you can find that will help you to make this a fun time where you can sit with your team and really think about what your personal and professional values might be. Moving on from that, we looked at how we could link those professional and personal values to practice. What does that mean for practice? And then lastly, what behaviours might demonstrate those professional and personal values that you have? That might sound a bit complicated, so I guess what I could do is give you an example. For instance, if a few members of your staff team decided that feeling loved or belonging was a personal or a professional value, it's time then to think about how that might look in your professional practice. So how might we welcome children and build relationships with our families so that we can really demonstrate that we want children to feel loved and nurtured in our setting and the wider community. This can be really linked to resilience in that, you know, thinking about a time when you faced a challenge is something I think we can all relate to right now. What helped you? Was it someone giving you a different perspective that helped you to work through that? What did they do? How did they do it? There are so many different takes on this right now, whether it's from being it's not okay to not be, it's okay not to be okay, or, you know, we must just pull ourselves together and get on. Everybody has a friend who'll cry with us or will offer us advice. It's about the moment in time that's important. We all face challenges, and it's how we adapt and respond to those challenges that's really important. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's something that does take time, and it shouldn't be a process that we rush. So back to resilience, how do we promote it in our settings? What conditions do we need? And how can we ensure that everyone has the opportunity to develop that kind of skill aptitude that we really want people to have? So the development matters and the EYFS clearly points us in the direction of the characteristics of effective learning. And in that, encapsulated in that section within the development matters is that active learning. Active learning points us clearly towards motivation and asks settings to ensure children have opportunities to keep persisting at a task that they find challenging. So when something's really hard and really tough, it's really important that we as adults ensure children have the time and the modelling to have a go. It actually specifically mentions maintaining focus and bouncing back. So there you've got resilience pointedly in the characteristics of effective learning. Within that section, there is also a column that suggests what adults can do and provide to enable children to develop a belief that giving a bit more effort or trying a different approach will pay off. And adults need to work with children, that are working with children need to understand this, and how the environments that we actually provide support and foster these aptitudes. It's really important that everybody understands this really well, because this is the bedrock of any learning that might occur. So some examples of what that might look like. We know that child-led learning experiences are those that enable children really to choose and decide what they want to do. It builds on their innate curiosity, their intrinsic motivation to learn, and that we need to really trust children by giving them the time and space to talk about their feelings and talking about their learning. We've established that by giving children this time and space, they feel valued, they feel respected. And also that if we focus too much on those adult-led or chosen tasks or activities, we narrow the curriculum, and sometimes that means that not all children are involved and their backgrounds aren't respected. So in a nutshell, building resilience really ensures that both adults and children can face change with positivity. It's not always easy, but we need to really help children and our staff to develop that can-do attitude. So how do we do it? Apart from the things I've already mentioned, I think it's important to consider other factors that may play a part in supporting children to reach good levels of resilience. And our environment is a key part of that. If we think about the opportunities we're providing, do they enable children to collaborate, to solve problems, to work together? And do we value the children's contributions to the way in which we organise and set up our nurseries? In my nursery, we're an outdoor nursery, we don't have a building, so the children spend all of their days outside, and being outside is a perfect opportunity for children to develop resilience, primarily because they are immersed in nature, there are very few toys or resources, there's lots of open-ended opportunities for children to explore, and they spend large swathes of the day, in fact all of the day, immersed in their play in an uninterrupted and unrushed way. They solve problems together, they have fun, they spend their time doing what they're choosing, and that's a respectful way of ensuring children can develop those key relationships with one another and with the staff. I think the other important thing is reflecting. So we continually reflect on the environment we're providing, the support and relationships that we're building with the children, so that we can use audits, peer-to-peer observations, and make sure we think about the quality of the interactions we're having with the children, the staff are having with one another, and really empowering children and really trusting them at this point to develop those relationships and develop at their own rate, which is key. We've used the sustained shared thinking and early wellbeing scales to think about all aspects of our practice, and these things and regular audits really help settings to think about and develop their own practice over time. Our current pandemic, the situation we're living with now, within that resilience will be key, and when we return we're going to need so much resilience ourselves so that we're best placed to support our families, and modelling resilience and being mindful of our own experiences within that will be really, really key. So I don't know whether there'll be some questions about that, but I was also going to touch briefly on planning, which might seem a bit strange, placed within resilience, but I guess in some respects one will feed into the other. And I think the reason that it's important we think about planning at this stage is we don't know what our settings are going to be like when we return, what support the children might need. So I will say that this section comes with a bit of a health warning, in that the practice that's been developed in my setting with my team over the past 3 years is very personal to us. It's something that we've worked really hard to arrive at, but it's not been without difficulty, but it is a really personal journey. So it's not necessarily something I'd advocate, it's something that I'm just going to put out there and let you go away and think about. So from the beginning with my nursery, we opened in September 2017. As I've already mentioned, we're an outdoor nursery, and we weren't really sure about how our day-to-day practice would be. We didn't know what sort of planning we would want to use. We had really low numbers of children. So we sort of walked alongside the children, which was a real privilege to see what this may or may not look like. And there were days when I can recall closing the gates to the woods that we use and thinking, oh my goodness, today, what did we do? We played hide and seek, we climbed trees, we hung out in some hammocks. And I started to be concerned with my team about whether this was actually enough. And I hate the phrase tick the box, but could we actually do that? And could we please everybody? Could we make sure the children actually learned something? So with that in mind, we tried some other things. We tried objective-led planning. We tried using the next steps planning on our software. But after giving each of those a really good go, and we really did, we decided that we needed to believe in ourselves in the way we believed in the children to drive their own learning. So we stopped doing it, and we stopped planning ahead at all. So, you know, this was liberating, but at the same time, it was quite scary. We still had moments where we felt that not planning everything or even something would mean that we'd fall short of somebody else's expectations. And we worried that we wouldn't be able to gather enough measurable data to satisfy Ofsted. We worried that people would judge what we were doing. But I think at the end of the day, we stood fast in our belief that spending time in the moment with children would outweigh anything else we could possibly have planned for them, because we were going along with their ideas. We spent our days with the children, facilitating when we were asked to, and really getting to know them and each other. It was a completely new way of working, but we felt that it was really important to try it. So we gave children the opportunity to manage risk. We wanted them to develop those invaluable skills of strategy changing, risk taking, thinking about how they might do something differently, which again feeds quite nicely into resilience that we were talking about before. So we continued on this journey. We gathered lots of evidence by spending time in the moment with the children, and what we noticed was a huge impact of working in this way. Because of that, we then decided, okay, this is what we're going to do. We'll commit to it fully. We'll share it with others. We'll share it with our families. We'll share it with our local authority, and we'll go with this and see how this goes and whether it works for the children, whether it works for us. So the children decide every part of their day, when they eat, when they sleep, when they have a drink, when they rest. We don't plan any of it. We don't micromanage any of their day at all. And I think the most important thing is we've learned to co-adventure and co-play with the children. And we noticed really quickly that giving children time, giving them autonomy, really empowered them to be confident in the choices that they made. This in turn leads to high levels of engagement, high levels of self-esteem, and their health and emotional well-being was noticeably improved. Even our youngest children showed increases in their well-being, their engagement levels, and their body language really showed us how relaxed they were in our environment. It was so clear to see, and is today, how happy the children became. They developed a real can-do attitude, safe in the knowledge that making mistakes is okay, and it's not just okay, but it's a necessary part of life. Play isn't always happy. There is conflict sometimes in play, but it's really important children have the opportunity to explore that for themselves without adults interfering. You know, they need to try out problem solving, working together, and our environment became truly enabling. We couldn't have wished for any more. Even children that attend that have complex additional needs, you know, they were able to access what our curriculum was, what our why is. And children developed language and communication more quickly. They found transition, which had previously been difficult, much easier. And this all supports resilience. So I'll end by just saying that I hope I haven't waffled on too much, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything. And this isn't advice, you know, you'd need a way of working out what suits your setting, you know, but why not try it in the interest of challenge and how we can all learn to approach these difficult times. I think maybe use some of your own resilience to try something new, and you might just like it. So I'll hand back to you now, Alan. I'm not sure whether I'm on the right screen or not. I hope so.
Oh, you're perfect. That was brilliant. That was absolutely inspirational. Thank you so much. I've been to many forest schools, but yours, if you have no buildings at all, sounds fascinating. I'd love to come and see it, and I'm going to make an effort to do so next time. Whereabouts in the country are you?
In the West Midlands.
Okay, right. Well, next time I'm there, I'm going to come and nag you and drop in. So a couple of quick questions just come in. One lady asked, she was so busy writing, you talked about 3 points to unpick with staff, and you said professional and working values, and then she didn't, well, she wasn't fast enough to write down what you said subsequently after that.
Sorry.
Can you nip back to that point for me? So just so you get some clarity.
So yes, the first bit was about unpicking personal and professional values, and there is a plethora of resources online where you can just put that in. Maybe it's a supervision activity, you'll find that easily, and there are ways of sort of picking out words. So you'll print off some words, and then the staff members will be able to select 10 of those that they feel best represents their personal and then their professional values. The next thing was thinking about how that links to practice. So if you, for instance, have some of your staff have identified partnership or working together, maybe for a more generic term, because you could apply that to your family or to work as one of your professional values, how that then may look in your setting. So the third point would be, what behaviours have you identified that might demonstrate that? So if somebody's walking into your setting, how would they know that partnership or a sense of belonging was intrinsic to your nursery's ethos or your pedagogical approach? They'd only know that if you were able to demonstrate it clearly by perhaps how you welcome parents when they arrive, what they see going on a practical level between the children and the staff, how they're relaxed, what sort of information is imparted to new parents when they begin and during the course of their child's time with you. So those three things were personal and professional values, how do these link to practice, and what behaviours might demonstrate those in your setting.
Lovely, thank you for recapping, that was really helpful. So look, we've been talking already about quarantine, and we've been talking already about social distancing in our nurseries, and I suppose to some extent you've got the perfect solution if you're an outdoor nursery, or certainly a better solution than most of the other people. So that was a question, but someone came on to say that they've got a really large outdoor space that they want to develop, and they were looking for some advice on how they can make that space somewhere interesting to explore, and the natural elements, and even looking at foods that the children can eat. What sort of advice can you steer our colleague on that one for us?
Okay, so I think any outdoor space you've got, regardless of what it is, needs to be utilised. And certainly for us, we don't have a lot of stuff. So yes, we're in a relatively new, it was only planted 12 years ago, 10-acre wood. We have sole use of this site, but actually we don't have a lot of things in it. So we started with a bell tent so that children could go and rest if they wanted to. We had a couple of hammocks, a rope swing, and obviously a mud kitchen, because you've got to have a mud kitchen. But apart from that, the resources we've got have kind of grown. So the children have determined that we don't have a lot of things. It's more things that children can really open-endedly engage with. So we've got drain pipes, we have got wheelbarrows, obviously spades, because children love to dig more than anything else. They love to make puddles when there aren't any puddles. So water. But I think the most important thing is not to overthink it. And at the beginning, we felt like we didn't perhaps have enough, but as it turned out, we had way more than enough. And we started to strip a lot of things away that we realised the children didn't need or didn't want. And I think being led by the children, it is quite a brave, or some people would say naive thing to do. But actually, by doing that, we've ended up with an environment we know supports all children, and they can all access it in a way that that they choose. We've got some big wooden reels that somebody donated for us, and I see a lot of people paint them, but we've left them so that the weather will obviously weather them, but the children can use them in a way that they choose rather than a predetermined way. So I think the key is to have open-ended resources, lots of things that you wouldn't anticipate would be useful, but actually they're used in a really clever way by the children who have their own ideas about what that should look like.
That sounds brilliant. I'm just thinking of my own children playing in the woods at the back of our house and how much they absolutely love it and are inspired by it. So it must be fascinating. I can't wait to come and see it. One question that came in is, what does TORA assessment paperwork look like?
What does what assessment paperwork?
Core assessment paperwork.
Core assessment paperwork. Okay. So and again, this comes with a bit of a health warning. We were inspected by Ofsted 2 weeks into the new inspection framework, and given that we're the only outdoor nursery in our area, the inspector had not been to another outdoor setting previously. So this was going to be a big challenge for us. We were really excited, but really quite apprehensive about how this might turn out, especially when it came to observation assessment paperwork. So we obviously are in a wood. We use a software system to record children's attendance and also to record some observations and assessments. But again, I will say just now that I'm not advocating people do it in this way. This is just the way that works in our setting, that we record very little. And the inspection handbook actually points out quite clearly that there is no requirement for providers to give Ofsted inspectors written formal observation and assessment records for the children in their care. What I will say as a caveat to that is you need to know your children really well. So we don't have loads and loads of paperwork. At the beginning, we used to do data analysis, cohort analysis. We don't now, because firstly, it takes us away from spending time with the children. So when we're with the children, using an iPad to record copious observations, basically for parents to see, yes, it's great, they get odd ones, but we will go sometimes a week and not record anything on the iPad in the system that we use, purely and simply because we've been in the moment with those children. So rather than being wrapped up in something that we think we should be doing, which is what I said in the bit before, we are actually in the moment with the children. So our assessments come from knowing the children really well, and your team need to be really on board with that. So I only have, there are 5 members of my team. We work with up to 20 children a day, but because we work on a ratio of 1 to 4 for all age ranges, we're very, very lucky that we can really get to know our children well. So in my inspection process, we weren't required to produce any paperwork at all for the inspector. She was happy to talk to my staff and hear how they could eloquently discuss each child's progress, should she need to know that. And I think it was quite clear that she could see the relationships that were being built between the children and the staff were fostering all of those really good skills that we were talking about before, and were really providing a solid base for those children. So we don't have masses of paperwork. We have very, very, very little, and even less since we were inspected, because we're now absolutely sure that the way we're working works for us and is approved by them. So that was a positive experience for us, to be sure.
Very good, thank you. I'm being asked to wind it up, but there are 2 questions that have been asked and I want to ask. So I'm going to ask you to give me briefish answers. The first one is, how do you coordinate the children's routines, i.e. sleeping, eating, etc., with the rest of the group? Meaning, how do you cover ratio to support everyone?
So I think, as I mentioned just now, which you might have covered this a bit, we work on a ratio of 1 to 4. So we've got children aged from 2 to 5, but most of our children are aged 3, 4 and 5. So we don't coordinate the routines. Children decide if they fall asleep or want to go and lie down. We've got an area that facilitates that within our tent. We don't follow any strict routines. If the parents have asked them to go to sleep at a certain time, we will try and facilitate that, as in we would take the children and offer them that. But if they don't want to, we don't obviously force them. You know, that's not our remit. We are led by the children. If they want to eat some of their lunch at 10 o'clock, we facilitate that. And I guess the answer to that question is because we operate a small group and we've got a lot of adults on site at any one time, we're in a really good position to be able to offer that. That might not work for all settings, so that's why I'm sort of tempering what I'm saying with, you need to work out what works in your environment, really.
Okay, lovely. Last question then, and this is the obvious one that you knew was coming. It asks about the weather and how you manage all the weather-related logistics.
Well, given that we've just had 6 months of torrential rain and now we're not at nursery and we've got the most beautiful sunshine, I kind of asked myself that question too. So we've evolved. We didn't know how this was going to look. We've got our base camp, we've got trees that we can't really put a tarp upon, so we have some posts put into the ground. We've got a 4x4 metre tarpaulin that we put up so children can all get underneath that. But you know, this cliched statement of there's no such thing as bad weather, it's bad clothing, is absolutely true. We have 2-year-olds who quite happily spend all day in the rain, provided we're checking them and they're working with us. We're getting them changed when they're wet. You know, we've been through 3 winters, 3 very different winters, and it's just about adapting. And we're modelling that to the children because we're learning all of the time. It's a really positive thing for them to see too.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, inspirational. Thank you so much, Rachel. I think we've all really enjoyed that. Again, you can't see we can't hear, but you can see a few of us. So thank you so much. So, ladies and gents, we're going to have another 5-minute break, and then we've got Alison Bates talking about adapting to our new world, and Jonathan Broadbury from the NDNA to give us an update from their perspective. But thank you once again to all of our speakers so far. Again, you're able to leave your screens on, it won't hurt or anything, and we'll regroup in 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Okay, everybody, we're going to get started again. And I hope you've enjoyed the presentation so far this morning. They've been very, very different, but fascinating in each every way. So we're going to hand over now to Alison Bates, who's going to talk to us about adapting to our new world. And perhaps more importantly, parent engagement and how critical it is as we enter this new world of ours. So I'm going to hand straight over to Alison. Alison, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi everybody. I'm Alison and I've got 3 playgroups, 2 of which are indoors and 1 is the same as Rachel, totally outdoors. And amazingly, through this time of adapting to the new world, I've also just put in for planning permission for our 4th nursery to be outdoors as well. So it's like having time on my hands. What can I do? Because it's very difficult when, like the same as everybody there, you know, you're all used to working and all of a sudden you've got extra time on your hands. How do we deal with this? So the first thing that I've done is thought, actually, what is my strategy for my nursery for the future? What do I need to do that I've suddenly got time to do that I've been wanting to do for some time? So planning permission has gone in for our 2nd outdoor nursery, which there's a new housing estate due to be built, so potentially things will get put back because of COVID, but it's still having, you know, everything in order. You know, we've got to be ready to go back. We don't know in what sense we're going back in, so you know, we still need to plan. So firstly is planning permissions, that's gone in, and that will be for 30 children at our outdoor nursery. We've had outline planning permission already granted to us for the building, and it's on our private 7-acre site. So we've owned that for about 13 years, and it's now just finally the time is right. Let's get all our ducks in a row for when we go back, because as Rachel said, you know, it's easier potentially to have your social distancing when you're in a very large area. But you know, when I look back and I reflect on where my indoor nurseries are at the minute, you know, things are very different because we're not open. You know, we're in a scout hall and a church hall, and neither of those facilities are open, so we're not closed down to choice either, which again is quite difficult when you're having choices taken away from you. When you're the owner, the manager, you tend to make those choices, and this has just been taken away. So it's a very, very different feeling, and I imagine a lot of you are feeling the same. It's not through choice that you're not potentially at work today, and it makes us feel unsettled. So it's about re-evaluating what we can do with our time. What I've done is I've taken a matrix. So I've taken loads of stuff home. Apologies, Ofsted, but I've taken loads of stuff home so that I can do things. And I've been looking at our staff training matrix and looking at peer observations and supervisions and looking to see where potentially I've got staff that need some sort of training. Now, here today, we're all on a Zoom meeting. So, you know, this is how we're doing our training at the minute. You know, you've got staff who are really, really good in one area, and it could be that we've had somebody new join us in the last 6 months. And so we're getting Zoom meetings going and talking to staff about, you know, what they can do to actually like pick up different skills, evidencing what we've done, and we're using pictures that we've previously taken, because obviously we can't take pictures now, and so we use like an online learning journal. So we've gone back and we've looked at some pictures, and we've made like a collage of pictures to support staff in those areas of training. Like it could be sustained shared thinking, it could be encouraging communication language. Something that we're all really keen on learning is more about children with additional needs. And I have my own son at home who has multiple disabilities, so you know, I learn as well as a parent, and it's really interesting then to consider my perspective as a parent as well as a nursery owner. So what we've been doing is that we've been going away saying, actually, let's read some of these books that we've been planning. I don't know about, you know, anybody else has got a big pile of magazines to one side that I just haven't had time to read, my subscription magazines that arrive every month. And I think I will do that, and eventually I've gone back now and done those. And there's a book that was recommended to us from our local SEND team. I can't remember who wrote it now. Dave Hewitt. It's called Intensive Interaction, and so myself and a couple of my staff have been reading that, and then we've had Zoom meetings so that we actually discuss what we've interpreted, what different activities we can then put into place for our children that we believe might be on the SND spectrum, because then when we go back, you know, we're all fired up and looking to, you know, do new things, and you know, it's about keeping your staff A, trained and ready to go back, and B, excited to go back, because this is, you know, as we've said, it's, you know, I hate that word, unprecedented, but it's unprecedented times, and none of us know what we're going back to. So that's something that we are heavily focusing on, is training. Can we do any of the standard government training? So things like prevent training, channel awareness, they're all available for free. So you just literally Google it and it will pop up. So we've made sure that all staff have got all that. The Open University have loads and loads of free courses, and we've said to staff, go away, go and have a look on there and see what you fancy doing. And they've come back with some really interesting things. One of the ones that I have done is dyslexia awareness. I don't know anybody with dyslexia, but I think it's one of those perhaps characteristics that we're not recognising potentially in our nursery, because what does it look like in a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old? How can we try and establish before they go to school whether they have dyslexia, because it's not something really that crops up. And sometimes when they recognise it too late at school, they've missed a good chunk of their foundation stage. So it was a free course. I think it's like 20 hours. Found it really, really interesting. And so again, then on our Zoom meetings with our team, that's something then that we're sharing, what to look out for, what activities we could do. And it's little things like, we get our children to put their face magnet, they have a picture of their face on a magnet, and they will put it against their name when they arrive. So they learn from very early age what their name looks like. But what we've realised is that potentially, is that just memory of where their picture goes? Is it always top left hand corner? So I'm thinking, actually, when we go back, we're going to switch it all around. Can they still recognise their name? Is it just the memory of where they were putting it, or are they actually reading their name? So again, it's little things like that, and you're thinking, actually, that's just quite a really good tip that we can do when we go back to establish whether there could be a potential for dyslexia. So it's just about, making sure that we're as ready as we can be, because none of us know what we're going back to. When are Ofsted going to come back and see us and everything? We want to make sure that we're ready, but primarily we're ready for these children, and we're not missing any elements that we could help them with. So I would say get your staff Googling on Open University, places like that, for some free training, and get them all ready so that when we go back, we're in a really, really good position. Let's just think what else that we've been doing. We're encouraging all our staff to read, like the book from Dave Hewitt, we're trying to pass it around, and there's like ebooks and everything. So it's really important to try and encourage your staff to try and stay in a work mind frame as well, because it's very easy to get into holiday mode, as we all know, and you forget things. And if they were to say, oh, by the way, we're going back next week, are your staff going to be ready? So we are saying, while you're out on your sun lounger, pick up, a magazine or something like that, or a reputable website, and have a look on there. We've also maintained a really good, close relationship with the local nurseries. This is something that has been ongoing now probably for about 12 months with the local, so there's quite a few of us all dotted around locally, and we all have a really good relationship. We'll meet perhaps every half term for lunch or a drink in the evening, but now again we're doing Zoom meetings with each other. Because we're closed, some of our children are key worker children, and they cannot come to us because we are not permitted to open, because the churches have all closed down. And so we have recommended the local day nurseries that they can go to, depending on where these families live. We've recommended A or B, and so when that child has said that yes, we're going to go and try the nursery down the road there, we've been in touch with that nursery, we've done Zoom meetings with them, reading out what's on their latest report, what that child might need to settle, because we can't potentially go to that other setting. Some of my staff aren't quite keen yet on visiting other nurseries, and vice versa, the nurseries aren't keen on us visiting them. So we've done it all by Zoom, because the main impact is on these children. So we need to make sure, like Rachel said, their resilience and their well-being is kept high. So it's again about keeping in contact with local nurseries as such, and sharing information. For me as an owner, it's actually quite a lonely job, because I have a great team. I have 20 staff, and they're all super amazing, but they're my staff, and there are some things that I don't share with them. So to have these other nursery owners, somebody that I can have a frank chat with and establish what they're doing, is really, really key for my mental health and well-being at the minute. So it's really important that, if you can, make contact with those local nurseries, local playgroups, and, childminders, keep in touch with them, because again, it's important that we're all singing from the same song sheet. If one's doing one thing and, one's doing another thing, that's where disparity comes about. So before we, would change anything or make any decisions, we'd probably have a Zoom meeting. So we'd probably have a Zoom meeting, and we'd get them on board about what we're about to do. So it's just nice to have that help for me as well, as I'm sure that's one of the reasons why you're all on this webinar, is we're all looking for some sort of assistance. Something else that we're doing is that we've seen loads of people do these virtual tours, and this is something that's still on my to-do list. Because we're closed, we can't go back and do a virtual tour because we need to advertise our playgroups and nurseries for September for next year. And so generally what we'd do is somebody would ring up, you say yes, pop down, and literally would show them around. Well, we can't do that. So it's about looking at how else I can market our spaces to try and get people back in. And so on my to-do list this week, although the weather has changed for me, thank you, is to do a virtual tour. Now, of my outdoor nursery, I can enlist the help of my husband, because clearly we live together, so social distancing, I'm trying to social distance from him, but sadly it's not working. So I think we can go down there, we can do a video of our outdoor nursery, because it's all still there, it's all still in place. Our bell tents, like Rachel's, are still up, rope swings, so we can do a virtual tour. And I've been told that iMovie is a really good thing to download to your mobile phone and use iMovie to actually make your virtual tour. So once you've done that, if you've got like a website, you could upload that to your website. That will still allow you then to advertise your nursery or your playgroup or whatever setting you've got, childminder, to encourage people to sign up for your September start, if we go back then, or even longer term in the future. So these are about things that we still need to do, and potentially as we go on, it might be that I go in myself and set up our playgroups and then take a video myself of us going around. And that's something as well that I'm linking to what Rachel just said as well, is that when you're doing your tour with Ofsted, it's about showing them the best things. Well, surely that's what you show potential customers as well. So if you're videoing your virtual tour, this is again something you can share them with your staff, and encourage them to think of key aspects that you need to put in there, and that will help you then create that learning walk for when Ofsted arrive. Finally, the last thing that we did for transitioning to the new world was setting up a Facebook group. This is something that I've really resisted for ages, as I was worried that you hear all these stories that it goes wrong and people put on negative comments. It's been amazing, the feedback that we've had from our parents from creating our closed Facebook group has been amazing, and it's great to see that they're putting videos on of what their children have been doing. We're suggesting one activity a day, because what we've got to understand is that every family is different and every family require a different level of service. And so if you put on like 17 activities a day, some people will be absolutely horrified and think, well, no, I can't do that, and we'll stop looking. If you put in one or two, they'll start looking, and that's when we've started getting the feedback. So this leads really nicely onto my next topic of parent engagement that we need now more than ever, and we are definitely finding through these electronic devices, through Facebook, is how we are reaching our parents, because they've got nothing else to do while they're at home. I'm sure everyone's screen time has increased. You get those reports each week, don't you, of how your screen time has increased. Well, mine's gone through the roof since I've been in lockdown. And it's the same for parents. So this is an absolutely fantastic time to get your Facebook groups out there, because I can guarantee they're going to be on it. And for us and for the staff, it's great seeing then what the children are doing. We take it in turns to put something on. So, it's not something that the staff have to do, but whilst they're at home with their children, if an activity goes really well, they've been videoing their children doing it and then putting that on the Facebook group, and the parents have really took that on board, of seeing the key person with their family doing something. And I think that all just brings us that bit closer. And this is something that we've got to consider, is that we've got to keep these parents on board. We've got to continue engaging with them, because if we just stop, because we're closed, if we just stop, then potentially that's when you lose these parents, because there's no engagement with them. So we just facilitate ideas, show them how it's done, and it's entirely up to them what they do. Some our key staff have been ringing their key children as well each week, so just once a week. So they've got like 10 key children each. They make one phone call. They might do like 3 on a Wednesday, 2 on a Friday. It's up to the staff when they ring, but they ring these parents each week and just have a quick check-in. Hi, how are you? How are you doing? And that allows us then to gauge their mental health and well-being, what the children have been up to, because you have to consider, again, we've talked about, not every family is different, and some people, if you've had a little concern about them, maybe a safeguarding concern, and then you haven't spoken to them for 3 months, how do you follow on with how things are at home? So by checking in each week, we're starting to continue to gauge how these families are managing. They know that we're going to ring each week, and literally it could just be a couple of minutes phone call. Hi, what have you been up to? What have you been doing? But they're talking to us, because if you've got a single parent and they're at home just with their children and they can't see family and friends, it's very, very isolating and very, very lonely time. So to get that one phone call from your key person, and they're used to talking to us, it's not like we're strangers. These are people that we've been talking to probably for 12 months or something. So for us to ring them isn't such an issue. We also get an idea of what lockdown looks like for that family. We keep an eye out, a listening ear, and it allows us to gauge what kind of service they are going to want from us in the future. So if some parents are really keen on submitting items to their online learning journey, but what we try and do is write a short memo of what the staff have been told, and then we can pop that onto their online learning journal, and it enables us to still have a holistic overall assessment of where these children are, because the likelihood is we are still going to have to do a transition assessment to the schools, and we need to know where these children are. So we're enjoying speaking to them, the children are enjoying speaking to the key persons, and it's things like it's a really great time to have these children at home, and what we're doing really is encouraging their independence. So our activities that we put on Facebook really are about things like, can they recognise things? Because when they go to school, they're going to have to recognise, their bag, their shoes, their coat. Because what it's like at nursery, parents come in, they collect everything up. It's not like that at school, and it certainly isn't going to be like that at school when we go back. We're not going to be allowed over that threshold, are we? So, the most important things really for a child is that they can communicate and recognise their own things. So potentially this is going to be the first time they're away from their main carer for a long period of time, and then going back to school. So I hope that's given you some insight into what Little Explorers is doing, and I hope that's given you a few suggestions for how you can keep in touch with parents and what works for us. But again, every setting is different, and you've got to tailor it for what your setting might require. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. Thank you so much. Quite a few questions coming in, and they're all sort of on one or two areas. We haven't got a lot of time, but I just want to clarify a couple of points with you. So quite a few people have said that they had a load of things planned, but obviously furloughing staff has made that somewhat difficult. How have you got your staff engaged legally if they're furloughed, or are they not furloughed?
Currently mine aren't furloughed. However, we have had lots of conversations with HMRC. HMRC have got a Facebook page as well, and we have had conversations with HMRC who have confirmed that keeping in touch with families is permitted. It is not classed as working. It is a requirement that we do keep in touch with these families. So I think it's on one of the HMRC websites, is that we are permitted to keep in touch.
Yeah, I agree with that. In the end of the day, the whole purpose of not working when you're furloughing is not doing your standard job. So that's not being in a nursery or a play group and actually looking after the children. I personally, and don't anyone take this as me saying so, but I personally feel that there's no reason why key workers can't reach out, key members of staff can't reach out to parents and to children and check in. It strikes me as being a no-brainer, so I agree with you on that one. The second issue that comes up was your comment about Facebook, and I agree. I think closed Facebook groups are great. But quite a few people have put on here about the issues of safety within Facebook, and particularly with children's images and videos of the children. What are your thoughts on that, Alison?
This is one of the main reasons why I've never gone down route before of having one, because you hear all these stories. However, the closed Facebook group is parents' choice as to whether they are putting their child's photos on. We aren't putting any of our children's, our nursery children's photos on. It is parents who are uploading them. So to me, that is their choice, that is their permission being given. It's a closed group, so it's only available to Little Explorers staff and parents. So if you were to look for it, you wouldn't be able to see any of our posts as such. I think you can see general things, but you couldn't see any of our children. So for me, it's parent choice.
Yeah, I get that. That makes complete sense. And I think a lot of people will take that very pragmatic approach. Others, though, as we know, will turn around and say, well, I don't want parent A to see it if parent B to say it. And I think that's always the issue that we all face and have to find a resolution to. Okay, I think we've run out of time. So Alison, thank you so much for that. It was really, really interesting to hear. I love the sounds of your playgroups. They sound fantastic, and your forest nursery right side school. That sounds brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that leads us very nicely to our friends at the NDNA. And today we've got Jonathan Broadberry with us, who is responsible for policy and press work with the NDNA. He works with NDNA members and strategic government contacts. So we're really interested to hear what Jonathan has to say. And Jonathan, the floor is all yours.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Alan. And I'm hoping everyone can hear me because I've just joined. So, and apologies for missing some of the earlier speakers. But I think to start off with, I think it's really important to share, obviously, with a lot of people who are providers and staff working in early years, sort of the gratitude that exists around there. We're seeing lots of positive messages about things that people who are still open are doing, and also there's things like keeping in touch that those who are closed have been doing as well with staff, with children. So we know there's a lot of really good work going on out there among early years providers. So just starting off with a sort of an expression of gratitude on that. Obviously, we do feel that early years sometimes gets overlooked and a little bit taken for granted when it comes to those expressions. So you know, there is a lot of great stuff happening out there. What I wanted to sort of run through is a little bit about the key issues as we see them for people at the moment. You know, a lot of people are struggling with different aspects, and then going on to some of the work that we've been doing through those issues, and then finishing off looking ahead at what coming out of the current lockdown might look like, and other support to the sector. So obviously the main thing that we're getting a lot of inquiries on at the moment is still the job retention scheme, and I know you've had the discussion earlier on furlough, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but we're still seeing 2, 3, potentially even more interpretations of the guidance that came out a week last Friday, and we know that people are obviously having to put in their April claims, and we understand that completely for cash flow issues. and getting the advice that you can through either the payroll support that you get or legal support and advice that you might have access to. Around that, what we're saying is obviously we know that it's important for you to get your claims in. The scheme is open. We've been extremely clear with the government what we think about them putting guidance out the evening, of the last working day before the scheme was due to open. It's completely unacceptable. And we have already lobbied the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Education to review the impact that's going to have, especially if people have to start taking staff off furlough and trying to understand. The Department for Education has talked about putting up an online tool for working that out, but these should all have been in place before the scheme was opened. We've seen the Minister's response. The Minister's spoken to MPs and said this was not a change of plan for the department. This was how they always saw it working. If that's been the case, then they should have been honest with people from the start so that you could have made those informed decisions. Another key issue that we have with the job retention scheme is that it's really helpful for those staffing costs. It's really useful for providers who do need to access it. But we're really concerned that it doesn't take into account those fixed costs that the funding was always there for. So we've never seen it set out either in statute or guidance that the early entitlement funding, whether in England, Scotland or Wales, is just for staff costs. But now just for treating it for just staffing costs, they're discounting the fact that a proportion of that would have been used to pay for rent, mortgages, other things associated with running a childcare setting. That is another area that we're pushing back on the government with regard to. And finally, the flexibility of the scheme. We know the flexibility of the scheme doesn't work for people, especially those who've stayed open, where you might not need a full staff team, but you might need people to come back covering absences and things like that. And this three-week minimum requirement just doesn't work for the sector now. The feedback that we've had from all the lobbying and work we've done around that is that the scheme isn't going to be changed. But again, we've highlighted how that is causing so many problems for providers who are trying to deliver childcare in these times. So the key thing from that for us is we know that you're submitting claims. We know that the situation still isn't clear. So it's really important that people are approaching the scheme openly and transparently, but are keeping hold of the evidence that you've used for putting the claim in that you have. So if you can't wait for the clarification, that you've set that out. And what we're doing on the other side of that is looking at the legal considerations of being asked to work under a scheme for which you haven't been told exactly how it's going to work. Certainly not from the start, and even now it's not clear. We also had the announcement last week around the flexibility on the early entitlement funding. I don't know how many people are dialing in from maybe Scotland or Wales, but obviously the situation is slightly different in those countries as well. But local authorities have been told by the government that they can approach the entitlement funding flexibly to make sure that providers who are open can maybe get more of that funding and adjust that from settings that might be closed, with those who have their payments reduced being then able to access a greater proportion of their job retention scheme, with the problems that brings. Now, the government have said that needs to be extreme cases. We want to see the guidance that's coming out to local authorities. As we understand it, it hasn't been published yet, so that providers can know what a local authority can and can't do in regards to that entitlement funding. We've already seen some local authorities making that decision already in Wiltshire, and I think in Hammersmith as well. They've either decided to take off a proportion to create a separate fund, or decided to hold back on payments that they would have made at the start of the term to keep some of that in reserve almost for when they decide how they're going to use it. Now, like I say, we want to see the guidance. We want to see what these circumstances that local authorities can use are. But also we did a lot of work around the underspends that exist in local authorities on the funded entitlement, and also the contingency funds that councils hold as well. So we think a large number of local authorities have historically had underspends in their 3- and 4-year-old budgets, and we want to see those being used first. And also at the start of the year, they will hold a proportion of their entitlement funding. Not every council does this, but to cover fluctuations through the year. So when the final headcount numbers come in, they might then release more funding or reduce a lower payment in that final term. So what people can do is we've published on our website a full report on this earlier in the year, I think it was early January, on what that picture looks like. So there was 60, at the time we published it, there was £63.5 million in underspend from the previous financial year across all local authorities, and they were holding on to about £26 million in contingencies for the financial year that's just finished. So if you are approached by a local authority as a provider and told that the local authority needs to adjust the funding entitlements, it's worth looking at that report, seeing what your local authority's position was. We've got a full spreadsheet of all the responses we got, and I think we got over 120 responses out of 150 plus local authorities. So most local authorities are covered, and you can see there the questions that you can ask are around what has happened to that contingency. Have you had an underspend that you can use before you get into these kind of adjustments? I'll just touch quickly on Wales and Scotland. In Scotland, the Scottish Government have said that they're going to continue all the early learning and childcare payments for funded hours there. And we know providers have got a very mixed, it's not as settled as in England. There's a mixed array of whether people are getting 600 hours over the course of the year, or 1140 hours over the course of the year, or aren't in partnership at all, and so don't get any of that public income coming in. And in Wales, we know the government has recently adjusted what was the childcare offer there to say that they're going to take some money from that to ensure that emergency childcare funding is available. But they have come back to say that providers can make a choice of whether they want to accept the public funding, and therefore the rules around furlough that come with that, or if they've looked at it and have decided that actually they're better off without it, they can make a decision to turn around and say, I don't want this funding. I've had to close because of capacity, or there's not the number of children attending that would make it viable, and so I want to be able to access the full range of the job retention scheme. So that is a bit of flexibility that the government in Wales have offered. I'm happy to take questions, when we get to the end about some of the specifics. And then obviously the other thing that we've seen come out very recently is the changes around the statutory changes to the EYFS, and what that can mean about staff qualifications and ratios, paediatric first aid requirements, especially for those aged 3 to 5, and the relaxation around the learning and development checks and the EYFSP. So there's a lot of things happening in that arena as well. And again, people can look at what's being put out, but what the government have said is very clearly they're trying to make it easier for those who are operating to do that, while still trying to keep safety as a key thing. So in there's a lot of talk about reasonable endeavours, and again what we're saying is that it's really important that people are evidencing the decisions that they're making around whether that is you know, reasonable endeavours to have the right number of level 2 and a level 3 in settings that are open, but also the progress checks at 2 years old, if they don't have to be completed straight away, but they still might be needed to be completed by the time the child's 3. Again, that comes if you know, if the lockdown restrictions are released. But what we're doing is obviously a lot of support for providers, but also for staff working in early years. So whether that's resources around supporting children with some of the difficult conversations that might need to be had, supporting staff well-being, because you know, whether that's work, you know, people being furloughed, whether that's people coming into the settings and the kind of increased risk and you know, the stress factors that go with that. We think that self-care and well-being are really important. So there's some more resources for our members around that, and a lot of this we're doing and releasing free. We've done work with the BBC around some of their home learning things as well, especially the transitions from leaving a setting and starting school. And we've also got some webinars around business continuity for members, and we'll be getting more and more information out about different things that we're doing. So if you are signed up as a member, look out for it, but also we've got a full section on our website about coronavirus support, whether that is what the government have put out there, or our own resources, or things that we're working on with groups like PACey and Early Years Alliance when it comes to lobbying and sharing the concerns of the sector. We do have issues about the coronavirus scheme. What we've said quite clearly to the Department for Education is that they can't just keep hoarding information. So what we're doing is we're collating you know, key questions that are coming to ourselves, to Early Years Alliance and to PACey from across the sector, and basically saying to the Department for Education, these are the questions that you need to be answering for the sector, because these are the questions that people have. Every time they seem to issue a guidance, you know, when it comes into contact with reality, you know, that's when the questions actually come up, because these things are being developed in you know, closed rooms and basement somewhere in you know, in government, and they're not always you know, practical, and they're not always working for people. And we want to touch very briefly on parent fees, because obviously within the press, a lot of the challenge that we have representing providers is that the press and media want very straightforward stories, straightforward narratives, and things around you know, parents who are key workers not being able to access childcare is a story that we're seeing. Certainly to begin with, we saw quite a lot. And then you know, parents being outraged at fees that they were asked to pay. We've done some survey work with members to show that, you know, the majority of people who responded were saying that they weren't charging fees to parents, but those who were, you know, it was because they had a very low you know, levels of funding from government. They had high overheads that they, you know, to be able to stay in business and to be able to reopen when things do clear up a bit, it is something that they, you know, they needed some income, they needed some cash flow injections, and so maybe they'd asked in March or April for fees or part fees, and so there are aspects there that we understand completely. And everybody's setting will be different. Everyone's circumstances will be different, but we are seeing, you know, the government saying that, you know, any parental fees need to be reasonable and balanced. But at the same time, we're also seeing those who've had insurance cover for forced closure, some insurance companies turning around to say, well, if you had a clause with your parents that say, if you close and it's out of your control, then you will still levy, fees. We know that that is set up for things like snow days or, staff absences or whatever, there might be a day or two. It's not for a situation where you've had to close for 2-3 months. So, we know that that is a concern around how that will be interpreted and applied by insurance companies. Like I say, even where there is that cover for closure. And then we've been doing a lot of work around testing, around protective equipment, and food supplies. These are the practical concerns for people who are still open. Lobbying supermarkets to make special dispensation for nurseries, and when you're buying food for children that might be outside the limits that they've put in place, but also trying to get local authorities to recognise that they can't just say, well, you're open, that's great, and leave you to fend for yourself. There needs to be that support. And finally, we were pleased to see that testing will be made available for childcare workers, because that we see them as they are critical workers, supporting other critical workers. So they do deserve the same protection. So that's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to take questions on any points and expand on things as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Jonathan. That's really, really interesting, and thank you to MG&A for supporting everybody. We've got loads of questions, Jonathan. Some of them are for Jackie as well, so I'll bring her in a minute, Jackie Mann, that is. But one that's coming from Jimbo, which I think is really important, is about all the questions that you're asking of HMRC and DFE, and whether you're getting any responses from them, firstly. And then secondly, he's saying, given that everybody took a decision to furlough staff in March and April based on the information they had at the time, shouldn't the government honour that? Because the clarification, whether it was right or wrong, the clarification only came out last week, and by which point most people had already taken the decision and were really proactive and did the right thing based on the advice given by government that we will look after you and we will look after your staff. People took that action. So the question from Jimbo is, shouldn't the government honour it?
We believe they absolutely should. I suppose you'd say we've taken a 3-point approach. First is that they need to review exactly the impact of that decision, because we don't think they understand the nursery business model. We don't think they understand the decisions that people have had to take. And like I say about the fixed costs, it's not in there at all. So we've asked them to review and reverse that decision, and that is obviously our first and foremost call on that. But in terms of how it's applied, we do think that it's an unreasonable approach to allow people to think one thing for nearly a month. Between the minister's letter on the 24th of March and this coming out on the 17th of April. So if that had been their intention all along, they absolutely should have been clear to begin with. They should have said, you will be able to access both, but don't think that you can access every part of both. That was our concern. And when we'd asked for that clarity right at the start, we weren't given it. We said, it sounds like you mean they can do this and do that, you need to be absolutely clear with people that that's what they can do. And for weeks we were asking for them to absolutely clarify that, and they didn't. And this is the position that we're in, and that's why I think we come back to the legal question of, is it reasonable for them to have acted in this way and expect people to now go back and reverse things that were done in good faith and on the best information that was available at the time? So that's an angle that we are exploring, and saying to HMRC, they will need to to be reasonable with people. You know, we know that it's not always something that HMRC auditors are known for, but that you know, people have tried to interpret the information that they had and the guidance that had been given, so they need to be reasonable with people.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. I think that's really reassuring for all of us to hear that view. Of course, we need the ministers to reflect your view, but it's really great to hear NDNA's position on that. There's quite a few other questions coming up about furlough, so I'm going to come back to those in a second, because as I said, I think Jackie will help on those too. But one of the other questions that's been asked is really about insurance companies and their woeful response to this issue, and particularly, you know, we only have 3 or 4 major insurance companies in this sector, and we all tend to use the same people, and NDNA recommends one of them. I think we all feel a little bit let down by the insurance companies wherever we sit. What's NDNA's position on that?
Well, yeah, so it has been, and you know, we've seen even the insurers who had, you know, previously offered this cover now saying whenever there's a renewal that it won't be covered in the future. So we get the impression that you know, it was never an intention that people would be covered to this extent. We were concerned right from the start about insurance cover, not just in the early years sector, but across a number of different business sectors, and you know, we've been working with the government to say there is a lack of cover out there. There is exposure, and you know, sadly, from what we've seen of how people are responding, you know, if this was to happen again in a year's time or something like that, we think that, you know, it would be the same situation, that people wouldn't have cover, and that's you know, we get entirely why people are frustrated and not happy. And like I say, it is happening across you know, a whole range of different sectors, not just early years. But again, you know, these insurance packages are there to try and cover worst case scenarios, and people have been badly let down by that. So it's you know, it's a very difficult position for people, and we totally understand that. We will be you know, obviously we look at all the organisations that we work with and how they you know, respond to the sector, and you know, we keep that under review, and that's what I can say about that at the moment. But yeah, it's you know, like I said in the talk about parental fees, we've seen examples of insurance you know, providers who had offered cover saying, well, actually now there's going to be limitations on what you can claim for, and we're lobbying the government and again the Treasury, who oversee financial services, to say that there needs to be a very firm line taken with insurers who have offered cover, and to make sure that those payouts you know, that people are expecting are made. I don't know how, we've not heard many examples of people getting all the way through the process yet, but we know that people have put claims in and are starting to get that feedback from insurers.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan, for that. So one last question, and then we'll go to furlough, because my team are telling me to start to wrap up. But Julie has asked, quite rightly, that leisure, retail and hospitality all got this grant of either 10 to 25,000.
Yeah.
Early years didn't. And I think, you know, the early years community, certainly for the first sort of 4 to 5 weeks, felt, okay, we've got the furlough, we've got the funding, we were okay. Yeah. But when the two were separated, they're sort of alarmed. What's NDNA's position on the grants and the lack of grants for our sector?
Well, that's it. So it seems, you know, it seems like, you know, the early years sector is treated like you know, public service when it suits, but also they want, you know, they want businesses to you know, face business liabilities when it suits them as well. On the grants, we've been really clear. We've lobbied the Welsh government. Well, we've lobbied all governments on access to the £10,000 grant, because the conditions on it mean that most early years settings aren't eligible because of size and rateable value, and to expressly exclude early years from the £25,000 grants. Again, we think it's an example of the early years not being treated quite as fairly and equitably by the government. So there's a big ask being made of the sector, but when it comes to backing them up and supporting, it seems like every opportunity to not exclude but limit that support is taken, and so we're lobbying still for access to the £25,000 fund for people who are too large for the £10,000 grant. We've seen some examples where people have received it. We've seen some examples where people have received it and then had the council take it back off them. So again, there's a lot of confusion about how this scheme should be applied, and we want the government to be absolutely clear that early years settings, especially with the changes to the job retention scheme, can access these supports, because we saw over the weekend the survey of providers who think they might not be able to reopen when this is all over. That's not a position to be applying for loans and things like this. And realistically, when people do reopen, there's this question mark of how social distancing is going to work, occupancy, things like this. So there's not going to be the opportunity to be paying back loans either, however well they are underwritten or dealt with.
Okay, thank you. I think you're more polite than I was about how the government's treating the sector. I appreciate you have to be, but I think we're all a little bit bored of just being beaten over the head every single opportunity.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you hear that all the time. Listen, we have to start to wrap up shortly, and I've got 3 or 4 questions on furlough that I've been asked to just get through. So I think these are really to Jackie, but Jonathan, they may be relevant to you. So both of you, quick question about staff who've been furloughed. Can they keep in touch with parents?
It's a very tricky one. As long as they aren't generating any work. I mean, there's quite a few of our settings have been setting up things with the children and talking to the parents. So I think you just got to be careful and not actually do any work, because that's what furlough is about. It's doing no work. And if they are seen to be doing work, then that's different. If they're just phoning to say, or keeping in touch with the parents just to find out how the children are and if there's anything they can be doing to support them during this time, I think maybe okay. But I think, again, I'd be interested to know what Jonathan thinks, because it's a very grey area.
Jonathan?
Yes, yeah, great. Again, it's grey areas are not helpful for people. There is a line in the guidance about not generating income, and so especially where it's things like supporting vulnerable children, we think there's a strong case that you can make there. So this is not something that is for the promotion. So if it's staff logging onto your Facebook and putting up posts about how lovely the setting is, that can be seen as promoting the setting for the future. Whereas if it's keeping in touch with vulnerable children and families, there's probably more of an argument you can make there to say this was staff giving up their time to support our families, rather than us trying to promote the nursery during this period.
Okay, thank you for that, both of you. My personal view, and obviously Parenta is, we have some staff furloughed. We're looking after 2,500 learners at any one time. My personal view is that my staff who are furloughed can reach out and check in on learners, provided they don't do any work with them, but that make sure that they're okay and they're safe, I think is a constructive thing, because that isn't generating revenue. But that's just my personal view. Jackie, Jessica asked, is there a time limit to submit furlough claims? E.g., I'm holding on to further guidance before submitting March, April, but I'm worried I may miss out on some kind of deadline. Thoughts, Jackie?
I haven't seen anywhere that there is a deadline for that. No, because if you've got the money to be able to pay the salaries, as long as you've paid the staff, and they've received their money, I don't see why you can't then reclaim it back later. I haven't seen anything to say that there's a deadline when it has to be done. But then that will depend on whether the staff have been paid or not, because some people have in their agreement that they're not actually going to pay people till they've received the money from the government, and that the employees have accepted that in their furlough letters. So that again could be another issue. If you've got a letter like that and then you're not actually submitting it for March, April or May, then people won't be getting any money. So I think it would depend on the individual case. If they're still going to be paying them, then I haven't seen anything that says that you have to submit it for the actual month. And it probably won't be, because if, like, when it went live in April, you could claim for April and you could backdate it to March. So I haven't seen that.
That's really good. I'm sure Jessica will be through with that. Jonathan, anything to add?
No, that's it. That's our understanding that the scheme will be live until, well, at the moment until June, but we're waiting to see if there's further announcements on that as well.
Thank you. It's Jessica. Just to say that, yeah, I have paid my staff. They are still being paid.
That's good.
Thanks.
Good stuff. Okay, everybody, we need to wrap up. I'm 3 minutes over schedule, and I've got a few things to say, and my team are telling me to cut it short. So I'd just like to firstly thank you all our speakers for everything they've done today. Jackie Mann, thanks for explaining this new F-beast. I'm not going to use the F word in that context, but the new F-beast, and it's clearly incredibly frustrating. Your clarification has been inspirational. Thank you for your time, and thank you for answering all those difficult points. It is worth highlighting, I think I opened up with this, Jackie's got a brilliant book out on HR, and we'll include a link to that book in the follow-up that we send out later on, a link to the version on Amazon. So strongly recommended. To Jackie Musgrave for some brilliant, insightful guidance into infection prevention, and also making feel us a little bit more confident about homeschooling. To Tonya, thank you for confirming about communication is key, and particularly about dressing up and puppets. That was brilliant. Rachel, thank you for giving us an insight into life at an outdoor nursery and how you can plan or not plan your activities for the children. It's fantastic to hear. Alison, thank you again for coming up with fantastic ways to adapt to our new world and proving that the engagement with parents is so important. And Jonathan, thank you for giving us your time, sharing your knowledge with us, and particularly giving us an insight into the work you're doing with government. You know, we're all counting on you and Casey and the others, and I'm sure you're all and your team are working really, really hard on our behalf. So thank you for that. To everybody else, thank you for joining us today. If Parenta can help you in any way, please do reach out with our team. We've got a few members of staff furloughed, but now is a great time to get people onto apprentices. We're still offering all of our apprenticeship services, so if that helps anybody, then just reach out to our team. It's a good time to get started. Thank you all very much indeed. Have a lovely day, but most importantly of all, please stay safe, people. We all want an industry and a sector to come back to. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you. Take care.